This episode is part of a series produced with the support of the SF Urban Program of the Architecture Department at Cal Poly.
Great. So I'll just tell you a little bit about who I am or how I started my firm. And
Perfect.
Of course, I went to Cal Poly and did the 5 years Bachelor's of Architecture, but also decided that architecture was too easy. No, I just was very, very passionate about architecture, and I knew from a very young age that I was going to be an architect. So I said, well, I already did my calculus in high school. Why don't I just go for a Bachelor's of Science in Architectural Engineering too? Because the first 2 years at Cal Poly are basically the same.
Right.
And so I decided to do that, and even though I don't practice as an engineer, and I'm definitely not really great with numbers. It did really help me very much in my logic and thinking. And so I do think it was worthwhile to be able to converse with my engineers. But it also set up a system my own internal system of my kind of design thinking and approaching things from a very methodical way, but also, I think in a rational way. So there's I was thinking about, what is about architecture that's so interesting and fascinating? And I think it's because it's very much based in like methods and systems and solving floor plans. But then there's this absolute intuitive sensibility too about like, hey, does this feel right? Would I want to live in this house, for example? And those are things that are intangible. So it's this very interesting, I would say, profession that's, a mix of very rational thinking. And then also just, hey, this is what I'm feeling in this. And so I always like when I do critiques for the Cal Poly fourth year class, I always talk to them about, hey, what does this feel like? What does the user feel like? Because everyone's so focused on trying to solve the program and the problem without actually what is there sitting back and trying to understand what it really should be about, which is what is it feeling? How are people reacting to this? Right. So I knew I was going to be an architect when I was probably 4 or 5. I just was playing with blocks one day. I'm the last of 6 kids, or the youngest, I would say. And I just was really into playing with blocks. And then I found out that there was this profession, or not that I was needed to go to work when I was in 4th grade, but I just said, wow, this is really fun. This is really fun to create buildings and have this kind of escape and imagination. And so this is a picture of me. This is Mrs. Walker, 4th grade.
Mrs.
And
Walker.
that on the desk there is a model that I built of my elementary school.
Wow.
Out of cardboard. My background is I'm Chinese American. I'm between 2nd and 3rd generation American. My parents were born in Hawaii. My oldest brother was born in Hawaii, and then my other brothers and sisters, we were all born in Long Beach. So we grew up in a very small and very modest means neighborhood. My parents moved there because there weren't covenants on the property, and we lived in a 1,200 square foot house. This is post-war Los Angeles, of course. And all our neighbors were Jewish because they also couldn't live in the neighborhoods that we wanted to live in.
Huh.
So it was a very interesting, upbringing. We were the only Chinese family in the whole neighborhood, so it was very alienating and very odd. And so I grew up just in absolutely, post-war Americana with the aspirations of wanting to achieve and being raised with the values that my parents really instilled in me, which I would call Boy Scout values, which was to always provide, always think about your retirement, but also give back to your community. So that was something that was very, very strongly instilled. In fact, my family still jokes about, how my father would say, are you contributing to society? He was the moderator of the Congregational Church that we belonged to, and my mother was PTA president for numerous years. She was a nurse for 50 plus years. So, they were very much into community and being part of the community. So those values actually are really inform me even till today, when I'm practicing and working with other people.
The interest in architecture, though, because it's a very specific profession, and a lot of people actually don't fully understand what it's about. And there seems to be a common assumption that to be a good architect, you must know math, and that's like the way into architecture. But so at the age of 4 or 5 or whenever this photograph was, were there architects in your family? Did you know someone in the profession, or?
No, my father was a civil engineer, but he also did top secret work doing the ICBM missile. And we knew that, he was the first in his family to go to college. So he somehow, through the post-war, the GI Bill, I believe, he got accepted to Harvard and then went on to MIT, or vice versa.
Wow.
So that was pretty remarkable. I mean, I did ask my aunt from Hawaii, it's like, how did my father get chosen? Because he was the younger of the 4. And they just said, well, they thought he was the one who was appropriate to go to college. And he ended up working for this very generic name company called Aerospace Incorporated, which was, they were doing all top secret work, doing the ICBM missile, and there were 30,000 people employed, all working in El Segundo, California. So we didn't know anything about his work, and he was very methodical, though. And so, I don't know, all my brothers and sisters were all very artistic. We all were encouraged to draw. We all, of course, as any Asian family we all had to play the piano. Of course, the violin. The boys played violins, the girls played cellos for some reason. I don't know how that got chosen to be their instrument of choice. But we were all, required to do all these things. And I don't know. I think I was internally, also my parents were Depression era children. And so all my aunties and uncles from Hawaii, they're all hoarders. So everything was saved. So there was this immense amount of, can you imagine 6 people or 6 kids? So 8 people in a 1,200 square foot 3-bedroom house. And then they were also hoarding things. So I had my little cubicle in my shelf. And I think that I had my little organized box of toys. So that probably was a strong influence about, hey, I think there needs to be some order within disorder. And I think I also had an imagination because I saw other people's houses. And I thought, other people don't live like this. I wonder why we live like this, and so I was just very aware of other spaces. And, I think when I was probably in this age, 4th grade or 5th grade, because this was a post-war, the Western Levittown, one would call it, Lakewood, Long Beach. And I started noticing, these homes are different. All these different, I could start to see the pattern, even at this age. And then I started going to downtown Long Beach. The community church that we belonged to had a historic church downtown, and I went down there and I started seeing the older homes, and I thought, oh wow, this is really fascinating to understand that there's these different styles, and why is that? So I was very curious, and I think that also it seemed like I could excel in this versus all my brothers and sisters were much better drawers. They were doing their my one brother was a really great kind of illustrator. So yeah, why architecture? Oh, what I was going to say is that it's not math, it's geometry, is which really is most important. And I really excelled at geometry. So I think that spatially, it's that. So when people talk about math, they're not. It's not formulas. It's more about concepts and 3D thinking that I think really distinguishes someone who can do well as an architect versus someone who's very planar. And also that does bring up the thought about how computers have hidden people's abilities to or has hindered sometimes people's abilities to really think conceptually in 3D.
I'm making a note of that, so I can ask you about that later. I'm very curious.
Sure. So I'm going to just go along because I know I brought a bunch of different little slides. So I just wanted to show you, this is our studio.
Oh, wow.
I was fortunate to get this is a very ridiculously elongated shot, but this is showing the messy studio. I was lucky to buy a building in the Mission 20 years ago. And it used to be a former laundry machine company. They manufactured laundry machines because this area in the Mission used to be the lagoon where historically, if you look at the old Sanborn maps, it says Chinese laundries. And so, which I think is really interesting because, of course, the Chinese were the only ones who were, well, they were the people who were willing to do the, quote, women's work, because women weren't around during the gold rush. And so it's interesting to be in this neighborhood and also in this building. So this is the studio. And then we just renovated our powder room, which is under the stairs. And I really like to use color in my spaces. So this was fun to work with Shishugiban and then do a surprise Heath tile powder room inside.
That's cool.
And my little dog there is poking out through the little hole there. That's April. This is upstairs this. I actually used to live upstairs in the studio, and then we grew so much that now the bedrooms have become conference rooms, and this is our common kitchen. And then this is my bathroom. That it was interesting when we posted this photograph online. This was actually when House just got started, which was probably about 10, 15 years ago. The comments were like, "What is that? It's like from Saws 2." And comments like, "I would never live in that bathroom." It's like, well, I'm not asking you to live in this bathroom.
Well, the people on House they're of a particular type, that's for sure.
Very conventional.
That's true.
Yeah.
And it was fun. It was really, I would say that the hardest projects for me are the ones that I do for myself because there's way too many decisions and way too many thoughts. So, and this was done when I was, 20 years ago. So I had zero budget to do anything. So I had to scrounge around and get, $60 Victorian fixtures from, renovation outlets and things like that. So, even my bathtub, you can see there's a $400 price written on it that I got from a salvage yard. So at least, that was kind of a scrappy beginning, but I think that, this shows my sensibility of okay, well, you don't have to spend, millions of dollars to get an interesting space. But it was a good lesson in doing my own project. So I'll just go now to the first project. So I'll tell you a little bit about my history. As I said, I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I did the double degree, so I was 6 years there, 4 years of summer school. And then I was accepted into the Fontainebleau program in France, which I did, which was really worthwhile. And then I also got accepted into the program, the international program in Florence, Firenze. And so I did that program for a year, and then I stayed for another year and a half. I, along with two other architects, Tim Power and also Mark Jensen, who's a noted architect here in San Francisco, we all three were hired by Enrico Coveri, who was a fashion designer at the time, to help influence the studio. So I lived in Italy for 2.5 years, and then came to a quick realization that being a straniero or a foreigner, and also being Asian and young, all three of those combined meant that I was not going to have really much of a future in Italy. Also, it's really quite complicated and difficult to be an architect in Italy. So I came back and I worked for a firm, found a job at Reed and Tarks Associates that no longer exists. But that firm did mainly institutional work, schools, hospitals, and I got a position as a junior designer there and was really, really enjoyed that working there because I was working on larger projects. And then about the last couple of years I was there, I was doing some freelance work. Of course, you're not supposed to do that when you work for a firm, but these friends of mine who were optometrists and who I met them playing volleyball, said to me, hey, we're going to get this little space in the Castro. And we're optometrists and we want to, it's 450 square feet. Will you design a space for us? And the budget was $50,000. So I did. I designed a space for them, and I did a lot of the finishes here. And it ended up winning an Interiors Magazine award, and it subsequently won a bunch of different awards. And so all of a sudden, that kind of launched my career in small interiors and commercial interiors. And at the time, since I was working for Reed and Terex Associates, I gave them the credit for this. And so that we were doing other interiors too at the firm. So it was nice to be part of that, including the firm. But eventually they went bankrupt. And so I went on my own. I didn't really have a choice, I thought. And I was, getting leads from people saying, hey, I want to remodel my kitchen, or I want to remodel my flat. And, I was charging them $35 an hour. So, yeah. And I was just working out of the front of my parlor in Coal Valley. So it was just a beginning, and I never really thought much of it. I said, well, as long as I can bring in more money than I'm spending, that seems like it might work fine. But quickly it grew as more people started seeing this urbanized. They started asking me to do more optometry offices. And so subsequently I've done, 25 right now. And we're currently working on for Cal Berkeley, we're doing pro bono work for their clinic, which sees probably about 400 people a day. So I've become somewhat of an expert, as one would say.
What an interesting niche to be in.
Yes.
So how long had you been working at that office before this first project came along?
About 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can see it's a little bit dated. Of course, this is almost 30 years ago.
It's not that dated. Yeah, no, I mean, it's,
Well, then they moved, they moved to the second space, and this won numerous awards from the ASID and also the SFAIA. So that was really nice. And I started working, I always like to work with stories. So this was conceptually about distorting your vision. So it was a small little, this used to be called the Trainatorium. And this is on Market near the Castro. And so there was a couple of beams that were already in the space, and I wanted to have this rational kind of thinking of balancing the left and the right, and I wanted to do all these kind of distorted kind of planes. So all the beams are bent, and there's this kind of false perspective with the mirror, and there's this weird ramp that, of course, is an absolute tripping hazard. I would not recommend that to anyone, but I just, it was slanted so that it could also act as an ADA platform and have access. But I like the idea of, again, creating this false perspective. This was a fun kind of project to work on. And I'm just going to follow up with a couple more optometry offices. This is an ophthalmologist in the Mission, and this client, super, super great people. He's been an ophthalmologist for, 30, 40 years. And they finally got this street frontage, and they wanted to put it into this Los Portales, which has these big arches. And I wanted to kind of use a anthropomorphic, face here. I mean, I worked with these funny eye shapes. I don't know if they realized that's what was happening. But, I like to, incorporate a sense of, play in my work too. I think that architects take themselves way too seriously, because living and enjoying life is not always about, being this serious culture maker. And, I know a lot of people take themselves too seriously in a way. I'm pleased with this because this was also done on a fairly tight budget, and we did these little custom eyewear display systems And then we took in the back, the reception counter is using the blanks for the sunglasses.
Huh.
So we thought that was fun, and that also recalls the mission, and its colorfulness that people associate the mission with its murals, etc. This is I Gotcha in the Castro also. We redid their space, and we wanted to have a passerby kind of just see this giant display that extends forever. And then we also did these custom, this is a display system that it's a line of, or series of different explorations we've been doing with CNC milling. And this is, of course, again, the eye shape with multiple different shapes that you can kind of put different frames in and change the display. And so subsequently from Urban Eyes, I was then asked to do numerous commercial spaces and a lot of restaurants and nightclubs and things. So the most famous or infamous one is Asia SF, which is, this is based loosely on a very exotic garden, tropical garden with the dragon's eye. That's the glowing ellipse there. And then these, at the time, very progressive shoji screens that change color. Of course, that's pretty standard today, but this was done close to 25 years ago. This was actually going to be a gay Asian bar when the owners approached me, and they said, we're just wanting some type of atmosphere. And then midway, they told me, well, we have such great food, we're going to become a restaurant. I said, oh, well, how many tables do you want? How many turns do you want? They had no idea about restaurants. They had no idea about putting together, how do you seat the many people? And I mean, it just was a lark, and it was a really fun lark. The back bar, instead of just being a back bar, all of a sudden then became a performance platform. So the wait staff is all transgender, and they perform and lip sync on top of that red bar. And then in the very back, which is next to the toilet rooms, that I created what I call the Dragon's Tail. So that's what you see at the very end to drop you down into the disco in the bottom. And this is Haze and Vine. It was a wine bar in Hayes Valley. This is Paradise. This is a restaurant in Palo Alto that was reworking an Irish bar into something, a hip California fusion bar. Unfortunately, her food reviews were so horrible that it closed. I think it lasted for maybe a couple of months.
Wow.
Wow.
Yes, it was really bad. The review was like the driest chocolate cake ever. And, on the menu, she was ambitious. She wanted a jazz club, and I think the food was a way for her to be able to have a jazz club. But we were allowed to modernize this space. She wanted a video screen, so on top of the bars, quote, the angel that you could project onto, and then we did all the furniture here. The dome was there, so I had to work with this odd historic dome. This is the Luna Lounge. This is also South of Market. Again, trying to work with a very tight budget to create atmosphere, and this is just using black light coming out of a box that one can sit on.
Huh.
And then this is one of our latest projects. This is Convert Men, and this is in Hayes Valley. So this one, again, a super tight budget, but so we kept the original floor. There was a bunch of pipes coming out of the ceiling, so it's like, well, what do we do? So we'll just add more pipes, and then we'll just string, some copper mesh and create a cloud formation. That was fun to do. And we also did the display systems and the hanging clothes system. And we're using cardboard in this, and I'll go in some other slides. I'll go through our cardboard usage and exploration. And then we have done over the period of time, I used to do all this commercial work, but interesting enough, over the 25 years, actually 26 years now that I've had the firm, we've segued more into residential. So, but normally we have one or two commercial interiors. So this is for Battery Ventures. This is a VC company that works with startups and also blue chip companies. So they wanted a feeling of solidity, and also we riffed a little bit on the mid-century sensibility. So we used stone on the elevator core wall there, and then used a painted steel for the reception desk, and in the back is a more casual sitting area, and there's the phone booth in the rear there. And here's a screen wall that we wanted to give the partners some privacy, but also some visibility. And then, so as I said, I started out doing some interiors, but my reputation grew from the commercial, and then we were always doing interiors, and most of the work is in San Francisco. So a majority of our work was interiors or additions onto houses. So, and as you know, the process gets more and more convoluted as we speak, even though there's such a housing crisis.
Yeah.
So I've done I counted my project load. I think I've completed about 800 projects, which is kind of crazy.
Wow.
800 projects?
Yes.
That's a lot of projects. And how many people are in your office right now?
Well, we are, let's see, I think we're about 15 right now.
That's a lot of projects for an office that's now at around 15.
Yes, actually, people are really shocked at how many, and I tend to downplay it. But, there's a bunch of projects that are in CA, construction administration, that is, and a lot of projects that are in planning. And unfortunately, the planning process in San Francisco takes at least a couple of years. So we can take on a lot of projects. I actually tend to be but one of the great aspects of being at Cal Poly and having the quarter system is that I became very, very quick at making design decisions. So, I usually can solve a floor plan in less than a day. Sometimes I feel like the house whisperer, because when potential clients call and they say, "Oh, we're in San Francisco," it's like, "Oh, where are you? What avenue?" Okay. You enter your house from the left or the right. You can almost kind of
really
draw up the house from just, it's pretty funny.
Interesting.
So, this is a house. This is a third floor addition we did for some clients up in Coal Valley, and they were really great because they wanted a very modern addition onto their Edwardian house. So, and they also wanted something that, the creating the ingle nook and using heath tile here, and the steel was a nice, and a very thick kind of concrete art was a way to kind of bring in modernity and also reference again the mid-century here. And here's their corridor that actually leads to this great view of the Marin headlands, and we placed the bathtub out in the hall. So this is their whole master suite, and the front room can double as a media room. And then this is another client of ours over on 17th Street, and he again had a high Victorian house in the front and wanted another more modern space in the back, and had a great collection of mid-century furniture and art. So we just riffed on that, used some unusual materials, aluminum grating on the side of the island, and then just warmed it up with the bamboo floors and also the cedar ceiling. And this is using steel in the back for the fireplace. And this is really different. I'd say that residential for me is a very personal kind of thing. I really want the client to engage, and so we're really listening to them because it is such a personal space, and building or designing a house, or as I always emphasize to my clients, a home. A home is really different. If you use that term home, it's different than a house or a structure or house number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Right.
Because I think doing the majority of our work in residential, you have to let your ego be put aside and listen to the client and understand what they, or at least give them the vision of what what you think is a home to them. And many people who come to us, actually a majority of our clients say, we were really attracted to your work because we could imagine living in them. They felt like they were, cozy.
Right.
And it's a really interesting thing when we talk about design, about, where does the architect's ego and where does, my quote artistic vision, does it mesh well with the client? So I'm always struggling with that because, of course, with any profession, you're aware of other people's work. Having run this firm for 26 years, there's always professional envy. There's always other architects. There's always going to be people who are doing work that you wish you could be doing, et cetera. And I also know that when I look at, if I think about the most idealized client, someone who just said, go for it and do it, it's like, well, I don't know if I would do what those other architects are doing either. Because I think that they're doing really beautiful work, really beautifully detailed work, but I'm not sure if the clients are really wanting that. I can't imagine living in that way, because a pristine house is really something that's a little puzzling to me.
I guess there are certainly some clients who are, they're basically looking to commission an architect to do. I kind of assume that those kinds of clients, they have multiple houses. So for them, they have less kind of commitment to having that house be a home, and it's more like just another object that I own, similar to my other properties, perhaps.
Yes. Yes.
But it is weird because on the one hand, if you have a client who gives you like a blank slate, like carte blanche, and do whatever, that's also very freeing. But at the same time, there's I think for a lot of architects, there's like a kind of a human and personal side that then gets erased from the process, and it's kind of disappointing also. Like there's something gained from projects when you have to work closely with someone, and if the client is not as involved, it's easier, but I also want to say it's in some ways less fun, even though clients can be a real pain in the butt.
I agree with you. I think actually it has more meaning to me when someone's working, even if I don't necessarily agree, or it's like, oh my gosh, look at the furniture they just added, or those things. There's and it's really interesting. I think that it's this weird level of control, because there's been I do a lot of volunteer work, and I also sit on the housing committee for the San Francisco AIA, and I also am chairing the home tour committee. And so I really that is to showcase architects and their work, and it's really interesting. Some of the projects that we've shown, I realized no one would ever be able to put any of their personal artifacts in, not even a painting, because all the walls are concrete, and it's very, very controlled. Like, and I actually am starting, and I just realized I'm riffing on this, but I just started drawing these little cartoons about architects.
Really?
Yes. Because I just thought it was a fun aside, and I have a certain ironic sensibility about us architects, because, the stereotypical architect is just so, detail oriented. They're always looking down at their feet because they're looking at the cracks in the sidewalk, and, they're trying to calculate the slope on the ADA ramp.
Yeah. Yeah.
In their head. So I think that level of obsessive compulsive behavior, which is really important to be an architect, can be also made fun of. So anyways, but there was this whole thing about my first concrete wall. I drew a little crib right up next to the concrete wall. Because I think it's pretty funny that actually people would think that that's an appropriate space for a baby.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's a side, but I think back to the concept of home and creating personal spaces for people, I do find it to be actually tremendously easier to work with clients who actually want to engage, because it's not just this, generic space. It has meaning. I want the spaces to be used, and if I don't know the people and how they want to use their spaces or the creation of spaces, that's really hard. And we do work for developers too, who are trying to renovate and flip houses, etc. we have a small percentage of our work is that. And that's actually a little bit more complicated. But that I just use a generic program, and that's sometimes it is easier in a way because I don't get the questioning of why are you doing this. We're going to rely on your expertise here and your track record. But it also is less meaningful because you have to then put in finishes and things that are more generically appealing,
right?
So that it can appeal to anyone who walks through the door.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
This is a house we finished in Noe Valley, and I like it because it was an old, actually, we kept the form of the house, and it was an old craftsman-style house that had been really badly mangled. And we kept the form and just let its eccentricities kind of come out from the facade. And then it was fortunate to be on a double lot, so we were able to add that entry portal on the right. And so we reorganized the existing staircase completely, so it made some sense, because originally you had to enter the house from the front of the house, and it was just a big mess. And so there was no way to understand how to enter this house. And this is the interior of it, which has a very glass and steel interior here, the staircase that is. And it was a really dark house, so we put in lots of large skylights. I tend to use the stairwells as ways to, especially in San Francisco, because most of the lots are built to the property lines, and normally the interiors of houses are quite dark. We tend to use the circulation as a way to vent and also get natural light into the homes. I do sometimes very architectural interiors when the client is really into it. And so this is an example of that. So the very severe black and white. And also this is a fairly monastic bathroom we did for a client of ours this was a master bathroom that was completely underground, and there were no windows to it. And we discovered that there was a extra crawl space next to the side of the bathroom that we could capture. So we scooped it out and then clad the whole bathroom in white plaster.
It's a nice tub.
Thank you. I'll go back to it. Now, this tub is interesting because one has to be very careful, because when they fill out that tub, this is something that one would never know. When you fill out that tub and then you lean back, the water goes flying out of the back.
Oh, because it scoops the water?
Yes, because no one would really think ergonomically that would happen. But right. I did that once in a tub like this. So I always have to warn my clients about that tub, even though you like it and it's really beautiful, may cause water to be flying out against the wall. These are a couple of interiors of the Sunset Idea House. I just threw this in because this was this was recognized by the National AIA when it had its conference here in San Francisco as one of the top 10 green buildings in San Francisco. It has a little bit of a sordid past, though. But we did this for Sunset Magazine, and it was to be a showcase of all these new green technologies. And unfortunately, it never got completed in the way that it should have been. But I was pleased with the way that the interiors, we did all the interiors, and also the furniture selection. And again, here's the stairwell that is a dramatic kind of 3-story stair that again serving as a light well. And then a majority of our work, we've expanded, of course, out into all the 5 counties. So this is up in Mill Valley. This was a little ranch-style house where the client actually didn't want to grow it at all. But they had bought it 20 years ago, and they really wanted a new reset. They were complaining about how dark it was. They loved the setting. There was a swimming pool next to it. They didn't want to move. So it was really nice and refreshing to work with someone who really just wanted to renovate and not get a monster home. So we just cut a skylight. We actually ripped off the low kind of ranch-style roof and cut a skylight straight through the house, and then kept all the bedrooms where they were, but reconfigured them and new finishes everywhere. So it has a, quote, modern country feel, I guess one would say.
Oh, that's really nice.
You have to find those words to describe it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we're trying to avoid the modern farmhouse, because most of those
yeah.
modern farmhouses, of course, it's a fantasy. It's like the avocado green of, the 70s. But we hope to be more interpretive. But again, I think that the diversity in my portfolio just reflects the fact that I believe that ultimately our clients, these are their homes, and we can guide them. But some people feel uncomfortable with high modernism, and it is a question that I always am not struggling with, but I think about, like, well, what is appropriate? Do I force the concrete wall down their throat, or do I say, hey, okay, I understand that. Let's work together and come up with a solution. I'm showing this house. This was actually a 1950s townhouse that was in a very interesting Eichler-esque complex in Menlo Park. 3 stories, and so we completely redid it for this client. Very lovely client, an ER doctor and anesthesiologist, and she had lived pretty modestly for all this time. And she said she showed us all these amazing photos of what she wanted to live in. It's like, wow, okay, let's do that. And so we took the quote mid-century roots and reinterpreted it here. She was so lovely. I really, that's the one pleasure of really working with residential clients. I'd say a majority of them are they're meaningful relationships, because you get to know them. And a lot of the parts of residential design is that you're being their counselor. They're trusting you with a tremendous amount of probably their largest asset, and they're wanting that feedback, and they want that interaction. And I always say that I've done my job when a client says, I designed this house. It's slightly irritating, but I like the fact that they've engaged themselves in the process so much that they understand why those decisions were made.
Interesting.
She really enjoys cooking, so we gave her a really nice kitchen. And then we've done some larger houses. This is in Hillsborough, where the client, again, a really amazing couple with 3 kids. And they had approached me, and they wanted to do, their reference was basically a Tahoe cabin. They really liked the feel of being in an alpine location. And they said, we want this. And I said, well, that analogy doesn't really work in Hillsborough. It doesn't snow. So can we work with something that is more interpretive? And they said, okay, well, what about, craftsman? I said, well, we could work with that, but maybe, and I see that you like Japanese art and you like Japanese screens and things. So why don't we work with a combination of Japanese and, craftsman? But we're going to clean this up. We're going to make it not this typical, standard craftsman, what you see throughout, because it becomes like a developer level type work. So they really committed to doing heavy timber and really exquisite woodworking. And this was a pleasure to work on. I know that this is not high modern, of course, but it's the plan I was very pleased with, because it wanders. There's a lot of discovery in this house, lots of playfulness that they were willing to incorporate. We have like a secret staircase behind a bookcase that leads to all the 3 floors. Another staircase that's a giant tansu shelf that the kids can run up and down. All the kids have lofts in their attics. So they were really into creating a playful house. Mm-hmm. This is the kitchen, showing the Japanese influences. And the interior designer who we worked with, Lisa O'Neill, was an amazing interior designer, and it was great. We usually, on our larger projects, we have interior designers, and we have a very good relationship with them because we're collaborative. And it's like, I always think that it's good to bring other professionals in, especially in a house of this size. This is the living room. You can see all the vertical grain Doug fir.
Oh, that's a nice space.
Very nice, yeah.
Yeah, and the view is amazing. Unfortunately, it was a cloudy day, but they're straight on to Mount Diablo. in the East Bay. Oh, and then this is one of our last houses that we did. This is the house in Menlo Park, which is one of the, well, I've done maybe 15 new homes out of the 400 or 800 I mentioned of the projects. Because being based in San Francisco, it's really, really difficult to tear down houses.
Yeah.
There's a process that is discouraging of that. And we also just don't have open land. And this client, they found me through a house we did over in Stanford on the faculty subdivision. And so I was really, really excited about getting this project because it's one of the first projects I was able to do a more conceptual or conceptualization of, because it was an empty, almost half-acre lot. So this house, they had, it's basically a flat lot in Menlo Park, and there were a couple of heritage trees that we had to preserve, but was in essence, do what you want to do, and they wanted a fairly modern but very warm house. So we just came up with a concept of 4 pavilions that were connected by glass walkways. So that's how it manifested itself. And then the 4 boxes are organized around an internal courtyard that takes the place of the front yard. And I was pleased to, the San Mateo chapter of the AIA gave us an honor award for this house. So it felt good to be less encumbered, I guess, by context, and also be able to do what one would say a more conceptual piece.
Right.
Here's an interior, a shot from the entryway looking towards the courtyard. And then this is the rear shot.
Wow.
Yeah. I know that's what one says is the money shot.
I was just going to say it's the money shot.
But it shows the clarity of the work, and it's also very simple. I tend to like to have things be pretty simple and distilled down. I don't like a lot of over detailing, and that's one of the things that I realize. I want to just be very straightforward. Most of our budgets don't allow us to do super, super crazy detailing. And although I admire it, I also think, that's a lot of resources going into those details.
Right. Yeah.
So I always think that, the best kind of room is something that has really great windows and a nice floor. And I'm happy with that. So yes, along the way, we've been doing some more, what I'd call more experimental work. So this is what I call the dining room. And this was
the dining room?
Yes, the dining room.
Okay.
And it actually was twice as large as this, or actually 10 sections of cardboard. So we were asked by California Home and Design and 7x7 magazine to be their table sponsor for an event called Dining by Design, which is an AIDS fundraiser for DIFA. That's the Design Industry Foundation Fighting AIDS. And it was set up about when the AIDS crisis broke, or about, 25, 30 years ago. And so they asked designers, mostly interior designers, to create dining spaces for an experience, and they do a fundraiser and they serve dinner. And we decided to just go for it. This was about 7-8 years ago. And so I said, I'm an architect. I'm not going to do decorative finishes. I'm not going to do a tablecloth. But I said, what can we do that talks about structure and environment? What can we do out of a fairly inexpensive material that would, say that we're architects? What could we do that actually could showcase our computer skills? And wouldn't this be interesting to use a material that would be recyclable and, talk about, we knew this was going to be a temporary thing. So we did what we called, it eventually became the dining room, which was, this was composed, as I said, it was 20 some odd feet long, 8 foot by 8 foot. It was cut out of 1,200 pieces of cardboard, about 70 gallons of white glue. We had a bunch of elves from CCA come and help us assemble this.
Oh my goodness.
And it was an amazing experience to not worry about the budget. I think I could have bought a car doing this. But it was really a great experience to just do this kind of interior environment and just say, we're architects. And there's a certain, I guess the cube, of course, with the very voluptuous interior. I really liked that contrast. And it was also interesting to see, glue and these little slats that are holding this cardboard structure up. How does it work? How does it function? So it was a really fun project to do. And then out of that came this whole furniture line, which is what we call Offspring, because this was used out of the remnants of the dining room. And so this is called the Blob. This actually won an award from the California AIA. And this was fun just to experiment. I would say that this is not the most ergonomic chair. We've in the future have done other chairs that are a little more comfortable. But it was also interesting to be able to use, again, the same technology and experiment with shape and form.
What are the white bands or lines?
Those are little thin plywood bands that allow the cardboard to have more stiffness. So they're like combs that keep the cardboard separated too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Oh, yes. On this mouse. So I just I wanted to show you this also because we then put the dining room into storage, and then after about 3 or 4 years of paying storage fees, it's like, oh my God, what are we going to do with this thing? And so it's like, well, we've gone to Burning Man. Let's just take it out and burn it. So we burned it.
But not at, is that Burning Man, or you just did this on the beach? Oh, okay.
And that was, actually, it was a really great experience to do that. My husband has gone numerous times, 18 times. I think I've gone 14 or so now, or maybe, I don't know, 12.
That is a lot of times. I might have to ask you about Burning Man.
Yeah. Well, I never knew about it until he said, hey, we met, and he's like, hey, you might be interested in this. But anyways, it was really interesting to serve, rice blanched, organic chicken, olives, and chicken tagine, basically, at 4 a.m. on the playa. But it was really, it was interesting, the several things that I understood, which was, it was really, really hard, of course, to keep this, to install it. People going to an arts festival, they're not necessarily interested in praising you. This is all about giving art to someone. And what really moved me was there was a professor of art from, I think she was from, I forgot, it wasn't Sonoma State, but she was so taken by our work that she just hung out all day long. And that was really moving to me, that I actually touched someone who was actually a professional artist, who was just fascinated by the usage of cardboard. And secondly, the other thing I really learned from this is that, most of the installations out there are not designed for people. They're not designed to shelter people. And during the day, because of the combs and the filtering of light, people would sit in there because the breeze would just flow through there. So those were two things that I realized, oh man, I didn't realize I was creating an environmental art piece.
Right.
That many people don't think about. And, as my husband, Mike, says that, John, you're an architect. This is a little uptight for Burning Man. Which I think it's funny. But
yeah, for Burning Man, yeah. I mean, what isn't uptight for Burning Man?
Yes, exactly. But I really, those were the two things I took away, that, this is really about giving, because it's a thankless task in a way to be, quote, in the art profession, and really expecting that level of praise. I mean, I feel so lucky to be an architect where we're working on buildings, and there's function, there's reason for our work. And then the art part, there's a small portion of it. I call them the magic moments that one gets when you're working on a space and you're lucky to get that one amazing view, or somehow the sun is coming through and all of a sudden it creates this magical moment, that might be unexpected. So, anyways, it was really fun, and it also was painful to watch it burn.
Yeah.
But it was also a good thing to move on. Oh, and so these are just projects that are in the works. I just thought you might be interested in seeing this. This is actually for my husband and myself in our property in Bolinas, which is a small town above San Francisco. And we're building what one would call a ADU or a guest house.
Mm-hmm.
And this is this is my interpretation of modern Hobbit architecture. Because it's, this is interesting. It's in a site on a hill. And I really wanted it to be a very small structure as you enter. And then it tumbles down the hillside and opens up to a nice view of the lagoon. So here it is from the backside. So there's a lot of different stairs and levels and discovery. So it's been a really interesting process to do work for myself, because I've been able to play in a way. And also there's that kind of inner child, I guess, in myself that wants to live in a tree house and have little nooks and crannies. So it's been really an interesting process. And also there's parts of me that realize that, there may be mistakes in this. I mean, when I get it done, but that's okay. We as architects are always so worried about making mistakes or trying something that's a little bit on the edge. And so not that this is on the edge, it's just that I know that there's some very different proportions that I would have probably not done for someone else. There's some very tall spaces, there's some very small spaces. You enter the space and the top room, which is a study, and you have a 7-foot ceiling. So there's certain intentionalities to creating eccentricities here. So it's been a very fun project to work on. Oh, and I'm showing you this because so we were hired. Our client, who was a doctor, just bought this closed down gay porn theater, and this is the outside of the building, and we're going to be replacing the building with a medical office building down below, and then 5 units of housing. So this shows this kind of scale we're doing. But I just thought it's been an interesting project just because of the history of the building and how one honors a former gay porn theater. So it's a very interesting historic resource evaluation that we're going through right now, and also this discussion of preserving history.
So how does one do that?
Well, that's interesting because, it wasn't always a gay porn theater, but of course, in the 70s and on, even when I moved to San Francisco, there was, there were a few places for people to meet. So, of course, the bars and things. Of course, now everyone does Tinder or those other types of meeting, internet meeting places. But this was a very important location during that time period. But previously, it also was a jazz club. So it actually started out originally as a jazz club that had some importance, and there were some very famous artists who did perform there. So there was a theater in there. And so one has to talk to the preservation, the prevention division of the planning department and talk about how do you honor that history and recognize it, because it's a use. It's actually not the building itself. It's the use. And of course, you can't legislate that a use has to remain.
Right.
And the owners here, they wanted to sell out, and they offered it. They didn't want to. They wanted to get their top dollar because they needed to retire. And so no one wanted to, that's the unfortunate part about if you have a quota historic usage, you can't force someone to run a gay porn theater.
Right.
So it was a very interesting, it's been an interesting process, one would say. And, but I'm also pleased to be doing an urban infill project here. Oh, and this is a radical house remodel for a house in Millbrae. So we're just taking this house, and it did tumble down the hill. It's a ranch-style house and has a great view of the airport. And we're completely redoing it in a very modern way, redoing the swimming pool. So this is typical of the houses we're doing down on the peninsula, house remodels or new houses. Oh, and this is one of the last projects I'm going to show you. This was a competition that we were asked to participate in for a compound down in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And this client, unfortunately, we were the runner-ups. But we were honored to be asked, and it was this client has 170 acres of land, and it's set amongst the firs and redwoods, and we were working with a concept of using elemental materials such as corten, board form concrete, and creating a sense of space and place amongst the trees. And then we came up with the concept of using 4 different elements. One is the water house, which is the pool house in essence, the tree house, which would contain their master suite with the little nest at the very top, which would be their private study, a cloud house, which would be the main living space, and then to the left was the moss house that would look down into the lichen-covered trees. And then they had started out with this concept of being the wee bothy, because this is in Bonnie Doon, and so we created the little bothy, which is basically a little hut for, usually it's a hut that passerbys or hikers will stay in for free. And so we put one in on the site for their gym or meditation space. So, yeah, and this is the image that we rendered.
Oh.
So they were very pleased with it, and so were we. But we weren't chosen, and it happens.
Did you get to see the proposal by the office that was chosen? No,
they were such a lovely couple, and I hope that they will share that with us. It's always disappointing, it's to not win something, but we have other projects that we've gotten, so we feel pleased about that. And so yes, I hope to see the other proposal.
Is that common for there to be single family? I mean, this is larger than typical.
This is very unusual.
Okay, I was going to say I have not heard of a competition for a single family residence.
Well,
before.
He also did it right. I mean, he said he's going to pay us, and he had asked me. He said, "John, is this a crazy idea?" I said, "No. If you want to kind of test drive people, why not? I mean, this is great, and you can, I think I actually support this idea, because I think it is really that mix and the real right fit. I call, usually in interviews like speed dating,
right?
Which is really hard. Like, oh, is that the right person? You either get a good feeling or not. And I do respect the fact that he really wanted to honor and not, just expect this to be done for free.
Of course.
So it is very unusual for a private individual to ask for this to happen.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then so we're also doing a lot of larger projects or more multi-unit buildings, but this is closer. This is one of the hand sketches I did for a project we're doing for this faculty subdivision on the Stanford campus. There's a section where the faculty live, and we were asked by Stanford to design 8 homes for them. So this is one of the concepts I came up with. It eventually became a more traditional feel because they wanted to match closer to the 1930s, 40s cottages. There's a pretty strong faction in the neighborhood of keeping things looking exactly like they were.
Right.
So, but it's been a really great process, but it's also nice to be given that confidence by Stanford to do these many, 8 single-family homes. And then closer to my heart is in Bolinas. We've been asked by the Bolinas Community Land Trust to design 2 housing projects. This is all permanently affordable housing. And the Bolinas Community Land Trust is a nonprofit that their goal is to provide housing for the local residents. And so on the Big Mesa, which is mostly farmland, and then there's a section that has been subdivided in the 1920s. There's a section of the Big Mesa where they are hoping to house farm workers, and they're going to create a co-op, farm workers co-op, and we're working with Bahar, who's helping us with these modular buildings. So these would be considered 2 houses with basically 8 bedroom suites, and then a common kitchen, and then there would be also a repair tractor space that would help the farm workers, or help service the farms that are, they're lacking in maintenance yards and also dry storage. So it's a really great community effort because we're hitting it on all sides. We're housing people who really need housing, who are working in the local fields, and then also helping the farmers or collectively organize into a co-op.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just my hand sketches showing the individual units that would be also having slightly private outdoor areas. It's quite windy on this section of the Big Mesa, so we wanted to give them protection and some sense of privacy. And we're also going to be trying to harvest as much solar as we can.
Wow. And
then lastly, in downtown Bolinas, again, this is a community of just under, I think the population is under 2,000 now. We're creating a little 8-unit building to the left. Actually, it's 2 buildings over parking next to Smiley's, which is claimed to be the oldest saloon in the West, which is currently, I know that's actually not absolutely correct. The owner told me. But, Bolinas is a very unusual community, a lot of different and very outspoken, idealistic people. There's it became very popular in the 70s. Many people moved there to escape out of the norm. And they're very strong environmentalists. They're very engaged. And so this is I close with this image because, I drew this up and have presented it to the community, and people were surprised at it because they said, "Oh my God, it fits in." and I said, well, why wouldn't it fit in? Why would I draw anything? Why would I design something that didn't fit in? And they said, well, we were just expecting something super modern, something that makes a statement. And I said, when I was younger, I probably would have pushed for that. Yeah, but I actually do want to, I want this to fit in. And I can put my ego aside and I can build a building that doesn't have to ape exactly the historic buildings in town, but it doesn't have to stand out either. Right. And I said that, the goal here is to provide quality housing and fill the tooth and the broken tooth and the smile of Bolinas. I know that sounds like such cliche, but it was a way for them to understand, this is our goal. We're trying to really work with everyone and fill a hole of an empty lot. And so I close with this because it is like taking my skill set of negotiation and listening and all those things and saying, okay, I'm going to try to design the most appropriate project for the community without, and leaving my ego, as I said, aside. Now, interesting, the last community meeting, someone said, this isn't funky enough. This looks too much like affordable housing. So I'm now going back through and seeing, how can I make it a little bit more funky, Anyways, it's an interesting dilemma to be told, hey, your project is actually too normal.
Right.
Can you make it more personable?
Your summary and the last slide that when we were talking about is a good lead into my question, which is, do you find that it's difficult when you're speaking with clients and undertaking of these varieties of projects under different styles, that the flexibility of the architect is something that clients assume doesn't exist? So they assume that you're adhering to a certain style based on your previous work, or they assume that because of whatever reason, possibly ego being one of them, that if we hire you, it's going to look like something you did in the past.
Well, that's, it's interesting, this question, because when I look at everyone else's websites, they clearly have this vision. At
Right.
least that's what this is my fantasy of my thought process, is that, wow, they determined that those three finishes were what they were going to use. And they have a very consistent delivery of projects. They all have the same features.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually have always slightly had my own personal internal mind going like, John, are you principled enough to, not cave, but to accommodate what this person is telling you? And I've always wanted to be a collaborator in a way. I think that maybe that stems from my childhood. I just don't know. But I've always wanted the client to have buy-in. So I would say that most recently, several clients have come to us specifically because they said, we loved your projects. We love the diversity. We think that's a sign of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
We see that it represents to us that you're not so rigid. And we, again, can imagine that we could live in these homes.
Right.
So I would say that it's interesting because websites and seeing what other people work on, all those photos are for a specific audience. And most websites that are created by architects are for other architects. They're not for the end user.
This is definitely true. Yeah.
Which is so it is, and I think I mentioned to you the other day when we were just casually speaking about, just even after practicing for 30 plus years, I still struggle with this question about, where the purism of architecture, like my artistic vision, is it really important that I get my way on everything? Do I want to impose that will? I mean, I would never say I was frankly right, but I understand, the way that he treated his clients was like, this is what you get. This is what you're going to wear.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is really uncomfortable furniture, and I'm going to design it because you are going to, this is the terms. And I think that's really presumptuous. And I don't want to control people's lives that way. I guess conversely, you could say, well, are you afraid to put a line in the sand? No, I'm not. There's certain things that I really strongly believe in. I strongly believe that, a house and when you open the front door, you should feel in a certain way. I mean, there's certain things I know are right. I don't know design style, though. That's the part I think is, I don't know if that language is right. Right.
If it's right every time across the board, especially.
Right. And then that's the question. It's like, it's my same dilemma with like Frank Gehry. It's like, how did the crumpled piece of paper become the design language for every single building of yours? I mean, I love the bravado sensibility, anything is possible because we have Maya. I mean, that's when I listen to his, his interviews, he just says, I would not be able to do this without this computer program. But it's like, really, is that the underlying reason? Because you can?
Right.
That's why this form has been derived? And that to me is like, well, that seems very superficial. And I he's obviously brilliant, and I'm not trying to speak negatively in the sense of, but I want more. I want to understand, why is that form? How did you conclude that is appropriate for a house and also an opera house or a museum? Why is the form, why doesn't it change conceptually? And so I think for me, I'm almost really curious about finding out who the client is. Are they excited about the color red? Are they, or do they hate it? I mean, those things kind of inform me. I think that I just want to know, because I want to hit all the marks and have them, when they're in their home or in their space, they think, wow, we just love this.
And I think that at the very least, also the interest or the curiosity in engaging in people and potentially different styles and preferences, aesthetic preferences, is just furthering your own education process anyways. I mean, it's kind of weird, this whole discussion, because when you're a student, you don't have a client, really. You kind of doing your own thing, more or less. And then when you get into the professional world, there is this whole, a new way of speaking you have to learn. In many ways, you have to learn how to speak to a client. You have to learn how to speak technically. But the other aspect is kind of the use of some of the words that you had mentioned, which was like, mid-century ranch style, French style, like these kinds of things. And it's kind of weird because it's a new vocabulary that you have to learn after, post-undergraduate school. And it's a way to communicate and get in with the clients so they understand where you're both coming from. But I think a lot of times as architects, we're trained in undergrad that those styles are superficial in a way, and there's more important things to be talking about in architecture.
But there is more than just adhering to one of those styles.
So I guess going back to I suppose the question is, transitioning through your career, was that a challenge for you when you went through those phases, and how did that go?
Yes, I think that. Well, when I was at Cal Poly, I just, copied. It was postmodern. It was the height of postmodernism. So I was, really into Michael Grace. And I always say, thank God, none of the work was ever built. That would just be like one of those embarrassing thought processes. I think it's actually really good that architects, it's a long career, and that you only start hitting your stride probably in your 40s or 50s because, it's just, oh my God, the badly conceived conceptions and things like that. I think that through the many years of what I know that people value most about what I'm giving them is there's a certain well thought out process of comfortability, I guess, or the house naturally flows. And in these terms I'm using don't have to do with style. It's just, there's like, okay, well, it's like naturally, like the kitchen, the eating area is next to the kitchen. Everyone wants to gather in the kitchen. I mean, those are basic ideas, but some people don't ever get that, right? So, yeah. I mean, I have these kind of certain things that I know work in the most successful way of how a house should flow. And then, I ask people about their children or if they're expecting children or if they had children or if they're older and how they want to study, how they want to sleep. Do they want nooks to curl up in? All those things. And so again, not about style, it's about flow and their desires. Now, also interesting enough in regards to style is that, the prevalence or the popularity of modernism is really, I would say, only like 10 or 15 years old in a way. And previously, people really, half my clients were asking for, oh, can you do this? I don't see any historic styles on your website. Can you do that, for me? Mm-hmm. I'm concerned about that. But now, there's been an absolute resurgence and appreciation of mid-century and modernism. I call it the dwell syndrome. But that's been easier to work with clients because they've been, is it educated or indoctrinated into the concepts of non-referential architecture as far as styles go. But floor plans and flow and logic of that doesn't matter what the style is. So I rest my kind of confidence on knowing that I've created and developed and designed the best flow and have captured the windows and the best views and that conceptually. And so actually, the way that I work is most of my, I start with the floor plans. I just am solving, and then I start to look at form versus going the complete opposite, which is creating form and then trying to shove the floor plan into it.
Right. Right.
So even though, as I said, I admire so many of my colleagues have such brilliant work and all this work that I, and secretly inside am, I'm envious of that. Because like, oh man, I wish I was doing that institutional work, or I wish I was doing that super modern, super severe, glass and steel with no furniture and everything. And then I think, John, would you want to live in that? It's like, I don't know.
Right.
You got to accommodate people's, really the function of a home is to live, allow them, let their hair down. I mean, unless my client, of course, as you could see from that whiting chair, that client didn't want a space where he could let his hair down, in the sense of he wanted that minimalist space. But I think that it's important, the humanism of what we're doing, creating residential work, that's important to allow people to live in their way. And they may not, they like to put their feet up and eat Doritos on the couch. How does that fit into your, minimalist space? I don't know.
Yeah, Cheeto hands.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. There's something else you mentioned too, was that your architectural engineering background and education, you felt had actually brought something to the table in terms of design and not in terms of engineering.
Yeah.
And we had talked a little bit about, the math or geometry, more specifically, folding into architecture. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit more, because on the one hand, it's a ridiculous thing for people to think that you needed to know, calculus to be able to do architecture. Because I do think for most people, it's an assumption that architects are engineering, like actually doing calculations. But at the same time, I do kind of believe that if you can learn to think systematically within a certain language, whatever the language might be, and in this case, let's say mathematics, that kind of thinking can also, not I want to say be applied, but also be beneficial to other processes like design. Absolutely.
So the systematic kind of iteration that I do when I am working on floor plans, I think that's very, I must say, I hated process. I hate process. Like, for example, in the sense of, I remember in like one of my fourth year classes, there was a requirement to follow your process and organize it. That was like crazy making to me, because it's like, I don't like to be under some rigorous rule based, like, okay, every day I'm going to write in my journal and then I'm going to put it aside. So I was just going to say that, but I realized that my process, which is iterative, and asking and then layering, trace upon trace upon trace, that actually is very methodical, in the sense that I immediately come up with like 5 ideas, and then I, will sketch them out, show them to the client, and then I'll start saying, oh, this one's better, this one's better, this one feels right. Mm-hmm. And then, I start to iterate over those things, and it's like, okay, I don't like the way that this bed hangs out. And, that's one of the other things I tell younger architects, like, oh, you need to put the furniture in. You need to figure out how, when you open that door, what do you see? And so that process of elimination of premise and then consideration, that happens very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. And I think that skill set of elimination and driving down to the point, which is, again, what I always insist on all of our designs. Okay, what is the big picture? And let's let that theme run through.
Right.
So that's my kind of rails that keep me from going off the deep end or being off target in what I'm presenting to my clients. And so I think that system, even though the reason why I react is like, I don't really have a system, but there is a certain amount of logical steps. We went from A, we got to B.
Right.
How did we do that? Well, we look A.1, A.2, A.4. Okay, now we're there. you know. And I think that leading that with the clients, it really helps them understand that this is just not coming out of thin air. There's actually a certain rationality to it.
Right, right. So it actually is very important that the client is also aware of these kinds of steps that the project is going through.
Well, I think it's really important to educate the client on that because they don't understand what we do. I think people just think that it just comes out of nowhere, or it's just somehow that person was brilliant and all of a sudden that idea came about. And it is interesting because, I always think of myself as being young, but I realized after doing, these 800 projects or so that I'm not. And it's not about the enthusiasm that when you start to feel that when you're older, it's not the lack of enthusiasm. What it is just like knowing, oh, I've done that before, or, oh, I know if I don't know the answer, I already know 10 of the things that I'm going to ask and try to figure out.
Right. Right. Right.
So I think that's the one thing about being more experienced is that it's like, oh, I don't have to guess. I'm not just creating from scratch. I actually have a long history of looking at things and considering them. And I can say, oh, I remember that project there. And that has to do with all situations, running the studio, dealing with numerous clients. There's always some situation, that you have to deal with. Running a business actually is completely different than running a studio. And I know that when I was at Cal Poly, there was a lot of like, oh, we should do a practice class. It's like, oh, who wants to do practice? That's really dull, I mean, no, the glory is in design. Everyone wants to be a designer. We want to, create these amazing buildings. But, actually, I realized too that not everyone, even those people are really brilliant designers, they may not be actually set out to be a good entrepreneur or a good business owner. You have to have that drive and stomach to be able to do run a practice.
Yeah. So then, jumping from that, you started your practice with that optometry, that one store, and then you ended up doing a bunch of those types. But through the years, and you've had the practice for 26 years or so now. You said, right? What were the highs and lows of it? Because historically speaking, starting an architecture practice on your own, not the easiest thing to do.
Gosh, I used to think I don't know if that's easy. I just did it. I used to think that it just happened.
But so that was never one of your career goal to one day have your office? You kind of ended up there? Okay.
I'll tell you, when I was younger, of course, this was probably now 6th or 7th grade, my parents had this book on American history. It was a Lifetime's compilation, and there was a section on architecture, and I'd open it every day and look at Frank Lloyd Wright's Roby House. And I had this fantasy like, wow, that was like almost like hiding it under my bed and looking at it at night. I thought it was one of the most fascinating and exquisite buildings ever. So there was that kind of inkling, well, God, he ran his own firm, But, during school, it's like everyone you're just trying to get opportunities, working for a firm that actually seemed really like a great fit. I loved working with people and I loved doing design. And so I never really consciously thought, okay, I'm going to run a business. I really feeling under the yoke of the man. I need to get out from that. But I also realized that being reasonable, like people would listen and that it seemed fairly normal to just, I can do this work and people will pay me. And so it never seemed hard to get work. I think it was probably just because there was a lot of work out there. I know that, several times we've gone through, I started my studio in 1994. And 2008, of course, was really difficult. So those were not great times. We're also going through a very unknown time now. So running the business is a little nerve-wracking, and I have concerns for, of course, keeping everyone employed and busy, as any business owner would want, because these people are relying on my ability to bring in work. So there's that seriousness and added pressure of that, since we're larger than I was, obviously, when I began. But I do think that, running a studio, it's really a completely different type of personality. And it's not just something that, I'm just going to open up my business. There's a lot of hand-holding, and there's a lot of personal contact that you have to be set up right to, or you have to have the right disposition, one would say, in order to work with people. You have to actually like people. And I mean, it sounds really silly to say that, but there's a lot of people who run businesses who don't like people.
Yeah.
And it's like, ultimately, I tell many of the younger people that I mentor, it's like, hey, if I get an interview, I think I have a really great chance. Batting average is really good, because you have to remember, people are not hiring you only for your design brilliance or your experience. They're hiring you because they want to work with you. They want to imagine hiring someone who can't even talk or even complete their sentences, or someone who actually, you can imagine spending 3 years of their lives being involved. And construction it's not for sissies. In the sense that, there's a lot of things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
There's a lot of orchestration of consultants and all these different people, and you're dealing with huge amounts of money, and things can go off the third rail. So you have to have the ability to be calm and professional. There's a whole psychology and an emotional aspect of being a principal at a firm, and not reacting and being, just confident in the work. So yeah, it's a growing and always learning experience running a studio.
It's kind of funny, because I think for some people during the careers of owning an office, they have to, some of the lessons and the things that you're talking about, they have to learn as they go. And there are kind of moments where they can look back and think, or periods of time rather, where it took me a while to figure that out. But to be honest, talking to you, it kind of sounds like you're just a natural at it. It sounds like maybe within you already there was maybe it was from your childhood, I don't know, the interest in community, interest in working with people, and plus that's a really cool powder room in your office.
Well, I think about, again, my childhood, and I think about my own psychology, and I think that I think being really different. Being the different one, and us being the only Asians in the community, I think that there was that isolation. I think that there was that, being instilled with those values of, you're going to really do the best job that you could do. You're going to succeed. My parents were not at all like the stereotypical dragon mother, that whole, like, I'm going to withhold all affection from you,
right?
Because they were from Hawaii, so it was a much more open and sensibility. But there was always this, like, we're all equal, and I expect that level of respect from anyone who I meet, in the sense that there are people who are really pretentious, people who put on airs that I just don't understand. It's like, we're all human.
Yeah.
And why don't we can we not all just get along?
Yeah.
And so yeah, there was that drive, and I think that it wasn't like somehow my parents said, okay, you're going to, create your own business. I just wanted to, I guess, do as well as I could.
Well, this has been very fascinating, and I have to actually comment on the work, because part of our conversation had to do with the balancing between the more kind of rational aspects of architecture and the more the aspects that are more difficult to describe, the more ephemeral, or the ones like how you feel in the space and style and things. And it's funny because a lot of architects, there's sometimes there are extremes, right? There are architects who are heavy into one style, or architects that you get the sense they're maybe listening too much to the client and there isn't a backbone to the project. Mm-hmm. But your work seems very intriguingly balanced between those things, where there's clearly some order and rational and thinking, some big ideas that are happening throughout the project. But within each project and throughout them, there's enough variety to show that you're not the only one creating the story. So I think it's really cool. Well,
thank you so much. That's very nice of you to say that. And it is, it is very. I'll close with this thought process, which I'm saying it's evolving. It's also my own personality, or my level of confidence, even at, as I said, 58.
Which I don't believe that you're 58. That's not possible. Like, I know you're Asian, and we talked about that, but there's got to be something else happening too.
Maybe it's water polo. I don't know. I haven't been able to play water polo for 2 months, but it's just maybe it's the boyish enthusiasm. I have no idea. Some people would say it's like the stupidity of being optimistic in a world like this, but who knows? But I would say that, it is evolving. The level of confidence, especially, I still sometimes pinch myself and think, oh my God, people are actually listening to me. Actually, I have a lot of experience. Oh, the Planning Commission is respecting my opinion. And that's sometimes is shocking to me, because it's like, wow, I actually have authority here. So I think that it is okay, having self-doubts and all those things about yourself internally. It's it's funny how those childhood impressions about, I didn't go into being bullied when I was a child, and all these things that happened because we were the other or the alien in the neighborhood.
Right.
But one would say those wounds actually still continue, and so it's a different story that one has to remind themselves of. Okay, this is not this way anymore.
Right. It's interesting because at the same time, I could see though where when you're in a position like that, you're kind of, I don't know, maybe forced, maybe even to kind of self-reflect and think much more about your own identity and the others around you and their spaces. So for me at least, I wonder if some of the perspective that you have that has led, I think, to the success of the practice, but also the design, again, ties back to just that awareness that you have when you come from a position that's of a minority, or a position where you're not, it's not as easy.
I don't come from a position of privilege at all, or entitlement. I come from actually a position of, do I get to deserve this, or and it's a little weird of a position, but it's definitely from my parents and we can talk about other things that do still affect me, which is the very blatant racism that is being espoused today. By our current administration and things like that are so infuriating to me. Yeah. But also just even being in the Bay Area, even that still I am in situations where still I'm considered not American, which is so irritating to me. I find it to be just so disturbing. And so it's very, very important, I think, for all of us to speak out, especially when those things happen. I don't want to be too sensitive, or like the snowflake, everyone's against me, but I also am very aware, and I have to continually remind younger people about covenants and things that they would never imagine could have happened. Yeah. I used to speak in the high schools for LGBT issues, and people would be shocked that there were black and white people could not get married, or other races, or that until the 70s we had anti-Asian immigration laws that were only overturned, in 1974.
Yeah, something really weird, something really a lot later than I would have thought, or many people thought.
Later than anyone would ever imagine.
Yeah.
And then they also, it's interesting, even younger immigrants get on my case for not being able to speak Cantonese. And it's like, you don't understand that I represent a generation of Americans that, because right after the war, what war? World War II. Mm-hmm. Remember, there was a lot of anti-Japanese. Yeah. We were throwing so many epithets at us being Japanese when we were younger. It's like, at least get it right, please. But they don't understand that.
Yeah.
They don't understand this history that is actually has been kind of swept away because it's not other people's history.
Yeah. Yeah. So. Well, this was a pleasure. I think the insights, the self-reflections, the work, everything was really great. And I think students and listeners are going to appreciate it. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And it was a pleasure. And
thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode. And you know what? You should check out the other episodes that were done in collaboration with and supported by the SF Urban program of the Architecture Department at Cal Poly. And that would include a recording with Anne Fugeron and Mike Piatok.
Yes,
very interesting.
Very good
both
interviews.
Both good recordings. Yeah. And shout out to John again for coming on the show and sharing us his stories, personal stories, and thoughts. If you like what we're doing, then support our show, please, by...
Go on our website, click on the button donate, and give us all of your money.
Yeah, money.
No, more seriously, if you don't have any money to give, that's okay. We will take a review on iTunes. So just go to the podcast app and leave us a review. It's always helpful for us to know what our audience is thinking. And it's a pretty competitive world out there in the podcast world, especially in the virus era. So any review makes a huge difference. We are also present on pretty much every social media platform, such as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Mm-hmm. Our episodes are available on iTunes, Spotify, and very often YouTube.
Absolutely. And look, I know a lot of you are like, I'm not on iTunes. Stop talking about iTunes. Well, unfortunately for us podcasters, that's the only place where you can leave a review. However, if you're totally reluctant to that, then just forward us your review and then we can make use of it on social media or put it on our website. Or I guess, leave a rating, like, and a comment on YouTube.
We also have a hotline where you can send us any questions you would like, advice or answers or debate even. You can text it or call the number and leave a voicemail. There's no chance we will pick up, so don't be afraid. The number is 213-222-6950. And don't be shy. Just drop us a line.
And thanks again for listening. It means a lot to us. We're at episode 100, soon to be 180, which is pretty wild. And we really appreciate your support. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you again next week or sooner. Ciao.
Adios.
Ooh, international, baby.